Spider-Man 2 is now 1 year old. It's funny and saddening how fast time can fly. I already reviewed this game a year ago actually, and while I was happy with that review, I want to go back and remaster it just a bit. While I consider the video to be decently well put together, there were quite a few things such as audio issues that brought the quality down quite a bit in my opinion. Also, I don't think I exploited enough engagement from the brain-dead comments yelling about how this game was ruined by woke. So, you know, a guy gotta do what a guy gotta do, Mile. This video is going to mostly serve as a definitive edition of the original video, although there will be certain differences in the script, such as I will be speaking about the new updates for the game we've gotten since release that weren't available at the time of that video. If you've seen that video, you won't be missing too much in this video. Before we begin, I want to say that if for some reason you still haven't beaten the game and care about spoilers, please go do that before watching this video. While you can just beat the story, I do recommend also going for 100%, as there's a lot of spoilery stuff in the side content, and on top of that, it's just a pretty easy game to 100%. With that said though, let's dive back into Marvel's Spider-Man 2. The story in this game is hard to describe. In terms of enjoyment, I personally love it a lot, but objectively, I'm willing to admit it's a fairly heavy downgrade from the previous entries, or at least from Spider-Man 1. Spider-Man Miles Morales is one that I've seen people agree is a little more up for debate. Since this game is called Spider-Man 2, I think it's best to start with the dynamic between Peter and Miles, and I genuinely don't have much negative to say on this. Their dynamic is absolutely on point in this game. They have such a brotherly relationship, and the writers clearly had a strong idea of what they wanted it to be. I love the remarks they make to each other, especially in the opening sequence, like with how Miles knows that Peter brought the untested gadgets anyways, or how Miles brings up the time they were playing a board game and Peter got mad that he kept losing. The brotherly dynamic is just so strong, and this lasts all the way through the first couple missions, which means when you eventually get the Miles vs. Peter fight, it hits so much harder. I do want to go back to that moment with the board game. I've seen it commonly used to try to say that the characters in the Insomniac universe are too nice, when I felt as if it's very clear that Peter is saying I was mad at the universe to try to deflect blame that he was in fact mad at Miles here. In general, the whole thing with the characters being too nice was always a weird complaint in my opinion. There's nothing wrong with having these characters have a positive relationship, and I think it's honestly really weird to want them to argue and shit talk each other at every turn when it's super unnecessary. Like, look, I know you guys don't have the most positive relationships in your lives, but not every friendship is this super negative and unwarranted remark at another person's expense. One thing I have come to understand though is that yes, this does make the symbiote a lot more of a tone shift than it needed to be, but that's more of an issue with the symbiote side of the story than it is with them being too nice. Speaking of which, let's get into that whole thing. Peter's addiction in this game is handled well in my opinion, and it's heartbreaking to see the downfall of Peter throughout the story. He's obsessed with becoming a better Spider-Man, and it doesn't help that he has no clue what is going on when he sleeps. This is shown best in and after the mission Wake Up, which is one of the most important and one of my favourite missions in the game. Wake Up sees you play as MJ and Miles, and you see the effects of what the symbiote does to Peter firsthand. Kraven's hunters attack Peter's neighbourhood while he sleeps, but the twist is that the symbiote takes control of him while he's sleeping. It goes ahead wreaking havoc as you do some stealth as MJ in order to catch up. You also get to experience this as Miles fighting the hunters, while Peter also joins in. MJ's sections are far more interesting though, because she gets up close with the symbiote and almost dies trying to talk to it. And the best part is this mission ends with Peter waking up on a park bench and acting like nothing happened. It's portrayed in such a Disney movie-esque way, as if Peter is living the perfect life with nothing that can go wrong, a utopia if you will. Even though for the people he loves, life is horrible, MJ is worried and scared of Peter, Harry is incredibly ill again and getting closer to dying every minute, Miles has been captured by Kraven with Rio, Genki, and Haley all incredibly worried, and Norman is losing his mind trying to find another cure for Harry. The first time you see him after this mission, he looks genuinely broken, to a point where, even despite what he did in the first game, I can't help but feel awful because you can tell he genuinely loves Harry in his own kind of sick and twisted way. One thing that this game gets right is that it does well at portraying the relationship between Harry and Norman. Peter's symbiote arc culminates with Mission 24, aka Anything Can Be Broken, in which is essentially a short boss rush where Peter goes to save Miles from Kraven's lair. He goes further than just saving him though, going so far as to nearly kill Kraven. The symbiote and Kraven both push Peter to kill him, and Peter is so close to doing it too until Miles jumps in and stops him, which starts one of my personal favourite boss fights of all time. I already expected it to happen, and it didn't change the fact that seeing the boss name change from Craven to Peter is genuinely just so cool, and it makes me unbelievably happy I was able to avoid all the story spoilers for this game. The visuals, the score, the dialogue, everything is perfect here, and it all comes together very nicely to create such an impactful moment in the game. I love how throughout this fight, the symbiote is the most in effect it's ever been, with Peter ranting about how he's the hero and how with the symbiote he's the perfect Spider-Man. He's everything everyone wants him to be. The guilt of being unable to save May and him potentially losing Harry is exaggerated by the symbiote and it takes over Peter. It's only until Miles gets over his revenge arc with Lee and steps up that Peter is able to be saved. Miles as a whole is probably my favourite character in the game. He serves as a breather from the much darker tone of Peter's story, but still has enough of his own thing going on with Martin Lee, who escapes from the raft after Craven's Hunter's attack. Miles has some of the coolest moments in the game, and its moments in Lee's world easily top the Lee segments of the first game for me. Miles' arc in this story is centered around not letting revenge take over, a very classic Spider-Man arc. And throughout the game, Miles is hunting Lee, but is held back by his friends telling him to let it go and focus on what's important. This all comes to a close when Craven captures Miles and forces him into fighting Lee in one of the best sections of the game, where Miles confronts all the doubts he's been thinking and assures himself that those doubts aren't true. Rio doesn't want Miles to stop being Spider-Man, Peter doesn't think of him as second best, Yankee doesn't see him as selfish, and most importantly, Jefferson isn't ashamed of the person he became. If anything, it's the opposite, and it's shown throughout the game. Rio knows Miles has to be Spider-Man, and she's proud of him for that. Jefferson would be too if he was still around. Peter sees Miles as the better Spider-Man, and Genki is perfectly fine supporting Miles throughout both Miles' game and Spider-Man 2. All of this leads Miles to realize that it wasn't the death of his father holding him back. He was doing that himself by letting his doubts, Lee, and the idea of getting revenge consume him. Speaking of Lee though, he was really good. I do wish he was in the game a little more though. I think Miles in general needed more time in this story. Honestly, the story needed more time as a whole. The first two acts are really good, but the third feels a little rushed. Venom doesn't really have all that much time and barely feels like a character. Don't get me wrong, he's still great, but it's less Venom and Harry and more just Harry. Venom's goal is just hee hee ha ha take over the world, while serving whoever is the host. There's no real character like he is in the comics or even the movies. The symbiote is just the body. Honestly, the weirdest thing is because of how little Venom is in the game, he felt like the side villain, whereas Craven was the main villain, who, by the way, is absolutely excellent in this game. Complain all you want about Venom, but Craven is a highlight in every scene he's a part of. But back on topic, it's weird when you consider how in the marketing, the biggest parts of it were how the symbiote would take over Peter's mind, how big of a threat Venom was, and who Venom was. It's why for this reason, for another reason I'm about to discuss, I think this story should have had far more missions. At least the same amount as 2018, because that game had 44 missions, where this one only has 31. Going back to what I said about Miles, he needed more time in this story as well. This is a very Peter-focused story, and that's why whenever you play through the story, I highly recommend you do all of Miles' side stuff, such as the Brooklyn Vision stuff, the Prowler quests, etc. Because I did that, I made Miles feel a lot more involved than he actually was. He's very much sidelined in this story for no reason, and doesn't get all that involved until the third act. I also wish they kept Peter's teaching career for more than 5 seconds, because the little bit we did see of it seemed genuinely pretty great. They built it up throughout the post-game of Miles Morales, so it's weird to see them just drop it pretty much instantly with this game. I really hope they go back to this idea, because in my opinion, a science teacher is the perfect job for Peter, and I'd love to see more of it. However, unfortunately, it's unlikely they'll go back to it, since with the end of Spider-Man 2, while he is taking a break from being Spider-Man, he's also now fully focused on the Emily May Foundation. Since I'm talking about the issues with the story, I may as well bring up some other issues I had, like I really did not like how Insomniac killed so many villains. In Craven's defense, I think his death is fine, because it's an important part of his character arc, even if I wish we got to see more from this universe's version. But the others don't really have this excuse. Yeah, they definitely serve to make Craven a more threatening character, but there's other ways to do that. Killing them off just felt cheap, and 4 of the 5 that died didn't even get an on-screen death. Rhino wouldn't have even been found if someone didn't intentionally pull off an out-of-bounds glitch to find what looks to be an unfinished version of Craven's room that just happened to have Rhino's head on the wall. And yes, for these deaths, you can use the excuse that most of them have successes in the comics, but here's the thing. In the first post-credit scene, Norman visits Otto Octavius in the raft. Norman spots Otto is writing something, and when he asks, Otto responds that he's writing the final chapter. Now, aside from the fact that this is a very cool reference and sets up for Peter potentially retiring or dying in Spider-Man 3, I bring this up because realistically it feels really weird to have a final chapter and then have a lot of the villains just being people that Peter has never even met, and so has no connection to them at all, compared to the first game where all of the Sinister Six were characters that Peter either had a personal connection with or had fought plenty of times in the last 8 years. The issue doesn't occur if they had just kept the originals alive and had Goblin kill them instead. Therefore, it actually feels like the final chapter, and with Peter retiring at the end, we could have the replacement for these villains come in, which gives Miles and Silk, who is teased at the end of the second post-credit scene and is another character I cannot wait to see adapted, a lot of new characters to work with and build their rosters with. Also, random thing, but I do want to say I'm tired of seeing that theory about Superior Spider-Man being what they adapt in Spider-Man 3. Please, just please, take 3 seconds to actually think about it. Consider the fact there's literally an iconic comic called The Final Chapter with Doc Ock as the main villain, and also the fact that them trying to adapt Goblin's origin and Superior Spider-Man at the exact same time would be a complete mess. And then tell me that bullshit basic-ass theory again. Anyways, I thought MJ was really cool in this game. She was much better than she was in SM1 because the writing for her feels a lot more competent and less confused. I know there's a lot of debate surrounding Reporter MJ, but to be honest, I feel like you've just got to get used to it at this point. It's far too late to change her, and for what it's worth, she's pretty good in this game. Her arc isn't too big, but she's still a good character, although I thought the use of Scream was kinda weird. Not awful, just a little out of nowhere. The boss fight showed a lot of her insecurity as well, and I like how it basically awakened a lot of the negative traits about Peter that even he realizes is true, such as how he's never really around to do his responsibilities as Spider-Man, and in turn it leads him to not really being able to spend time with her. Which definitely makes the fact that he's taking a break at the end of Spider-Man 2 feel pretty well earned. My only real problem with it is that it definitely could have used more build-up, because MJ doesn't really show to think like this at all until Scream interferes. The last story thing I have to discuss isn't even the main stories, it's the side missions. Now, I'm not going to talk about everything because there's some stuff that's very much just not all that interesting, but I will try to talk about as much as I can. The side missions in this game are some of the best side content I've genuinely ever experienced, and I would go as far as to say it's on par with the main story. I thought the Mysterium story-wise were really interesting. I like how they handled Mysterio here too. His design is pretty cool, and it's nice that they show he's actually trying to change. His line about how looking under the mask is when things get messy was a neat thing that really summarizes not only Spider-Man, but a lot of his villains too. There's also Prowler stashes for Miles, which aren't too notable until the final mission, but I do think it's a cute way to progress Aaron's character, and it is cool having him move in next to Miles. The final cutscene with them is really cool, and it's worthwhile payoff for getting all the Prowler stashes. The Flame questline is where the side quests seriously shine. They're the follow-up to Spider-Man 2018's DLC, The City That Never Sleeps. Yuri returns as the vigilante known as Wraith in order to take down a cult that is steadily rising, known as the Flame. Throughout the quest, you see Yuri and Peter argue on what path to take when it comes to stopping the Flame's leader. Yuri doesn't care about killing him if it means saving a million more lives, whereas Peter refuses to let her kill him and would rather just lock him up for life. It's a fun time as it leads to you eventually fighting Yuri in a cool but very simple boss fight. However, the final mission is my favourite. After preventing a train from crashing into a tanker, the Flame reveals he has his own symbiote, which is none other than Carnage. This is such a fucking cool reveal, and I love that we're getting a Carnage adaptation. I also really liked the Brooklyn Vision quests. There's 4 actual quests, they're all pretty much just standalone stories, but there's some good stuff in there. I really like the one where you have to help a student ask his boyfriend to homecoming, as well as the one where the school mascot gets stolen by Midtown High. My favourite though is probably the Brooklyn Vision's Club Fair due to how it's got good character moments for Miles, and it's just genuinely a fun mission. There's also the Cultural Museum quests, which, while pretty simple, are fun quests that give you a lot of history regarding legendary Harlem musicians, keeping the community aspect surrounding Harlem intact. My favourite quests easily come from the Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man app requests. Yes, they've returned, and they're genuinely just beautiful. Out of all of them, there's only one that's not really worth talking about and somewhat lackluster, that being Rooftop Fireworks, which, while fun, just isn't that interesting in my opinion. The rest, however, are peak Spider-Man content. Let's start with the most controversial one, however, with Graffiti Trouble. I'm sorry, but if you have issues with this one, I'm giving you the biggest side eye known to man. Genuinely just a really cute mission that develops the relationship between Miles and Haley really well. It's also great representation for deaf people. I know there's complaints about the human missions, but this one is really short, and best of all, it's optional. So, don't like it, don't play it. Photo help is great too. I like how this game chose to show more of Peter's early days, not just in the side missions, but in the main story too. Though, the only downside is, now I really want a Spider-Man Origins game. Insomniac, please, you could make so much money off of that. Monsters in Queens was a cute mission. You have to help this blind lady remove a monster from her backyard, which turns out to be one of the hunter's robot dogs. Through Genki, you can turn this into a guide dog, and the best part is once you complete this mission, you can go back to the lady's house anytime and play with the dog. But of course, I had to save the best missions for last. Find Grandpa and Howard. Find Grandpa is pretty obvious from the title alone. You have to help a girl find her grandpa. After doing some puzzles, you finally found him, and your reward is depression, as Grandpa Earl recounts his proposal to his wife, who has long since passed. He mentions how love is such a beautiful thing, and even though he might be fading, when he sits down on that bench, it feels like his wife is right there with him. It's a beautiful scene that genuinely defines what Spider-Man should be. Of course, it's always fun when he gets to go to space, or team up with the Avengers, X-Men, etc., but the little things like this are what truly define Spidey as a hero. He's a voice for the little guy, even if it's just a small thing like helping a kid with his homework or walking the elderly across the street. And then finally, we have Howard, my favourite side mission in the entire game. For those of you who don't remember him, Howard was a side character originating from the first game back in 2018. In 2018, he has to catch his birds as a collectible thing, and in Miles Morales is a full side mission dedicated to catching only 3 birds who are being used upon a heist for the Daily Bugle. In Spider-Man 2, you actually aren't catching any birds. After meeting with Howard in the financial district, you sit with him for a bit and watch the ferries while Howard reminisces on his life, how he wants to set off on a new adventure. Eventually, Howard asks one last thing, to send his birds up north and set them free, while Seabird from Lassie Brothers plays in the background. It's an incredibly emotional moment, however nothing prepares you for the terrifyingly heart-wrenching moment that occurs when you drop the birds off. Spider-Man takes the train back to Howard only to find an ambulance in his place. No fucking joke, my heart sank to the ground when I saw this, and I think that's a testament to how well written Insomniac's side characters are in all 3 games. The fact that a character who only has maybe less than 15 minutes screen time across all 3 games can make me so emotional is incredible writing. In general, I think despite the flaws which I've addressed here, the writing in this game is still genuinely pretty good. Again, it's not perfect, but it's also not worth the outrage I've seen over it. It could be better, but considering Insomniac has admitted the game was rushed because of Sony, I fully believe it's not that bad.
Speaking of our heroes, Marvel Spider-Man 2 will introduce the ability to switch between the 2 wall crawlers in the open world, and thanks to the power of the PlayStation 5, you can make that switch almost instantly.
Alright, let's discuss the gameplay. We need to start off with the swinging, and oh my god, I'm never shutting up about the swinging. Everything is perfect. The swinging in the first game was fine, but you really couldn't get too much speed with it, and especially after playing Spider-Man 2, I've noticed it definitely feels pretty heavy. Miles Morales improved on this formula a little bit by adding a more diverse air tricks, as well as adding the Venom Dash and Venom Jump, making swinging a bit faster. However, overall, it was more of the same, which is totally fine as Miles Morales was obviously a spin-off game and not a direct sequel. But Spider-Man 2 just perfected the formula. First of all, the swinging is now 3 times faster and definitely feels way less heavy. On top of that, there are so many new additions. The biggest one, in my opinion, being the web wings. The web wings are genuinely such a massive game changer. Being able to pick up speed and then glide across the city just feels so good, especially when combined with a loop-de-loop, which is another great addition. You also got the corner tether, slingshots, the ability to turn fall damage on and off, swing assist adjustment, and the ability to surf on water now, plus the returning additions of dynamic air tricks and the dash and jump from Miles' game, which now Peter also has. It all fits together to create, dare I say, the best web swinging we've ever received in a Spider-Man video game, and I could not be happier to say that. Moving on, I actually want to talk about playable characters, which sounds weird because you'd think there'd only be Miles and Peter to talk about, and while in free roam, yes, you'd be right, in the missions there's a lot of times where you won't play as either, but let's start with them first. Peter gets a serious upgrade from his initial game, and I actually somewhat find him more fun to play as than I do with Miles. His abilities are incredibly fun to use, with him having a mix of the spider arms and symbiote abilities, though I gotta say I much prefer the symbiote moves to the spider arms, especially with the ones such as the punch and strike. The symbiote powers don't end there though, with Peter having the symbiote surge, a move done with L3 and R3 where for a short time, Peter will be almost invincible, and also essentially two-shot enemies. This feels insanely good to use, and while yeah, it's fairly overpowered, it's for a short time, so I really can't complain. Also, Peter is in general absolutely broken against symbiotes because once you unlock Anti-Venom, his symbiote abilities and Surge give symbiote this status effect that makes them much weaker and easier to kill. Also, like I said earlier, Peter now has more dynamic air tricks, similar to what Miles has, and he gained the Spider Jump and the Spider Dash from Miles' game. Moving to Miles' gameplay actually hasn't changed all that much from his game. The only differences being the Venom bar is gone now, with Miles just having Focus instead, and also that he now has evolved Venom abilities, aka Blue Lightning. These are obviously much better than the normal Venom abilities, and are really fun to pull off in succession. However, obviously the old abilities from Miles' original game are there if you prefer to use them instead. I think Miles was just already perfect in his game, so there really was nothing they could do to make him feel much different here, which is not a bad thing at all. The only issue I have is that I wish Miles had his own way of giving the symbiote the weakness, because while yes he has the Sonic Burst, that's really about it compared to what Peter gets, especially considering Peter also has the Sonic Burst. But who cares about these Spider-Men? I want to play as MJ. Yes, Mary Jane Watson, and actually, I'm not entirely joking this time around. Breaking news, but MJ is actually fun to play as, and funnily enough, the solution was fairly simple. Just make her not die after getting spotted once. This alone, as well as giving us a sprint button, easily made the MJ missions fun for me, as they become more of a Last of Us third-person shooter type game than a boring stealth mission like the first game where you're completely helpless. Actually, the final MJ section is straight up just a third-person shooter. Assuming they bring these back for Spider-Man 3, I hope they keep this formula. The best playable character, however, is easily Venom. Yeah, we finally have a playable Venom after way too long, and he feels so good to play. They just make him an absolute tank in this game, and it's genuinely great. He's so fun to play, and it makes me kinda sad we're only able to use him for one mission. It'd be cool if they added him as some kind of 100% reward, or for just beating the story. I know it wouldn't make sense story-wise, but also neither does Peter being Spider-Man after the story ends, since he's supposed to be on break, so please, Insomniac, make Venom playable in free roam. The only other playable character is Haley, and there's not much to say there, as I've already spoken about her side mission, so let's talk about the combat and overall gameplay a little more. One of the new systems added in this game is the suit tech. This essentially works as a secondary skill tree, except instead of skill points you use tech parts and hero tokens, the new collectibles in this game, of which they are extremely generous with. Suit tech has 4 categories: health, damage, focus, and traversal. In my opinion, traversal is the least important of these categories, and if you're doing a first time playthrough, I highly recommend going for the other 3 and saving traversal for last. Especially because this game puts you through hell with certain boss fights, particularly the Kraven fight at the end of Act 2. Speaking of the boss fights, these are such an improvement over the first game. You can now actually see the boss's health and how many phases it has left. Not to mention, these bosses are actually somewhat tough, and to get the most out of them, you'll need to take advantage of all the new systems at play, such as the parry system, which has changed combat so much, not just in boss fights, but in general. There's also a small change to how focus works, where you can no longer heal whenever you want, and at first, I didn't really like this change, but after sitting on it for a bit, I've come around to it. I think it definitely makes fights a lot tougher, as you have to prioritize whether you want to heal or use a finisher instead. While not a new system, another thing this game changes is the gadget system. The gadget wheel is now gone completely, and replaced with a much cleaner UI. It's also easier to pull off. All you have to do now is hold R1 and then press one of the face buttons. It's very simple, and it's way better than the wheel we had in the last 2 games. The gadgets this time around are all pretty good and very useful. None of them are too overpowered either, I use all of them very equally. However, it's unfortunately not perfect, and there is one issue I have with the gadgets this time around. For how customizable the combat of this game is, I really wish we had more than 4 gadgets. Maybe bring some of the gadgets from the previous 2 games back. It'd be fun to mix and match instead of being locked into 4 predetermined ones. And yes, I know that it'd add even more to upgrade, but it's not as if this game is short on tech parts. I said earlier that this is a game very generous with its collectibles. Even after upgrading everything, I still have a ton of resources. Rare tech parts can still be found across the map, and normal tech parts can be gained through just playing the game and doing crimes. So not having enough currency definitely isn't a problem. While I'm at it, I may as well go into more of my negatives regarding gameplay, but there isn't too much, thankfully. One issue I have is the removal of a bunch of quality of life features that were present previously, such as the character bios, the ability to activate crimes whenever, the lack of being able to listen to the JJJ and Danacast podcasts whenever you like, etc. Even after the updates, there's still some stuff missing which I'd really like to see. The podcast point is even worse because there is a surprising lack of podcasts in this game in general, even compared to Miles Morales, which just makes the open world feel somewhat quiet in a sense. At least for me, the podcasts added a lot of life and personality to the city, so it just feels pretty quiet not having them be present here. There's also 0 post-game calls, which both Miles and 2018 had. I also wish we could go inside some areas, such as Miles's or Peter's homes, or even let us explore Feast a little, see how it's doing after Miles Morales. Just some explorable areas that let us speak to people or characters from the previous titles. Even have cool Easter eggs there, just make the world feel a little more open and lively. I do also want to bring up issues I have with the stealth of this game. Stealth is mostly the same as the previous 2 games, but a big issue I have is with the web line, which does make stealth a little too easy at times. One advantage to it is that it does mean you can now stealth crimes and stuff if you really want to now, which was pretty much impossible in the last 2 games. But outside of crimes, in actual levels, this can make stealth incredibly easy. While yes, enemies can look up and there are the bird drones, those features only matter if they actually spot you and not the web lines. The fun part of stealth in the previous 2 games was finding places to perch on, and now this is just gone because you can just make your own place. But other than the suit selection, which I don't really think is worth wasting time on, that's pretty much all I have when it comes to the negatives of this game. But since I was talking about the open world anyways, I'll just continue on with that. The open world actually feels really good to play in. It's now twice the size of the previous game's edition of Queens and Brooklyn, and it's really easy to just get hooked to it for hours. Speaking of the crimes, they've been seriously upgraded in this game. There's 4 factions when it comes to crimes: your regular everyday thugs, hunters, the flame cultists, and symbiotes. However, the cool thing about these is these crimes can now mix together. A lot of the time you'll have other factions come out of nowhere. Alongside that, if you're playing as Miles, Wraith will sometimes spawn and help you out. If you're playing as Peter though, not only will you sometimes find Wraith, but you'll also sometimes find Miles. You can also sometimes have a civilian be injured and you'll have to take them to an ambulance. All of this means you're never going to have a crime play out the same like in previous games. There's always going to be little differences in each crime, which stops the game from ever feeling repetitive or boring. Not to mention there's quite a bit to do in the open world that I was left somewhat overwhelmed when I first started playing. The first thing you unlock is the Sandman missions. These are very simple, quick beat-em-up missions that you get Marco memory crystals for completing. These crystals come together to form a cute statue of Flint and his daughter. The photo ops also return, but this time instead of landmarks, they're photos of different things going on in New York, like people throwing a toy Captain America shield across a rooftop, or Teo's Bodega having its own knockoff store. There's also hunter blinds and bases, which are actually pretty cool. Essentially, you complete 3 hunter blinds in a certain district and they reveal info on a hunter base hidden in that same district. The bases work similar to the bases of the previous 2 games, but you have little side objectives alongside taking down enemies, such as taking down communications so they can't call backup, shutting the bird drone recharge stations, etc. Another hunter-related thing you have is the unidentified targets, where you chase a bird through New York via a slipstream. And man, I'm sorry, but these are just very lame. Gameplay-wise, they are very simple and do not really require much input. I really don't think I've seen a single person fail one of these. Moving on from the hunters, we have more Prowler quests, which thankfully do not result in creating a beat sent from hell. These were pretty fun and used the PS5's DualSense controller very well with the pressure mechanic, which is used all throughout the game. This game generally does use the controller and the PS5 as a whole to its fullest advantage. There's also symbiote nests too. These are cool little challenges that are similar to the Sandman missions in the sense that they're both quick beat-em-up missions, but they have the twist of you have to defend the sonic burst placed on the heart of the nest for 2 minutes so that the sonic burst can blow up and destroy the nest. Except these quests are somewhat worse because they're just kind of there. They're fun, yeah, but like there's no actual story surrounding these. All you get for completing these is a really cool Miles suit titled the King in Black suit, which is obviously a reference to the Venom comics of this same name. I really feel like they could have done more with these story-wise. Another open world thing I gotta talk about is the Mysteriums, which are essentially the Taskmaster / Peter training challenges of this game, and these are kind of a downgrade. Don't get me wrong, they're fun, but man, they feel somewhat samey in the sense that they're all combat related now, instead of being a mix of stealth combat and traversal. They're also only able to be done by Miles, which, fine, I don't have a problem with that, I just find it weird how there's no equivalent of these for Peter. When it comes to the EMF experiments, these are probably my favourite side activities. They're all very different from each other and not boring either. Genuinely a unique idea for side stuff, and I would love to see these come back in Spider-Man 3. One last thing about this open world that also somewhat ties into the story, which is how I love that it continues the trend Miles Morales started, and doesn't just treat the last 2 games as if they never happened. Roxxon is under construction, Fisk Tower is now owned by the Fantastic Four, the Brooklyn Bridge is still broken from the fight between the Underground and Miles, even the tech crates found across the map are said to be old Underground crates, the radio tower and Oscorp is still destroyed and being repaired from Peter's battle with Otto. It may not seem like much, but it's the small things that make you feel like this world is lived in and reminds you that this is an unraveling story. Now, as of writing this, we've had a couple new updates come to the game, the biggest one being the New Game Plus update releasing March 7th, 2024. This update was large, it fixed a ton of bugs and added a ton of stuff people have been asking for. Of course, the main draw being New Game Plus finally being added, as well as the ability to change the time of day whenever you like after beating the game. Upon starting New Game Plus, there are some extra things you can unlock that are exclusive to that save file. For example, Ultimate levels, which allow you to level up past level 60. These ultimate levels don't really get you much outside of small health upgrades and some suit styles for the Black Suit, Symbiote, and Anti-Venom costumes. On top of that, there are also some gadget upgrades in the form of golden gadgets, and also Suit Tech Fusion is here now. Suit Tech Fusion is the most interesting to me as it makes it so that you can now have both options at once in Suit Tech groups, whereas previously you had to pick which one you wanted. Golden gadgets, on the other hand, are a really disappointing addition to me. Don't get me wrong, I'm happy they added something to gadgets, but these don't do anything. You can barely even see the gadgets because of how small they are. You don't get any upgrades either, they're purely cosmetic. It doesn't help that all of this is a massive grind to get. You'll have to do multiple New Game Plus playthroughs if you want everything there is to offer. This update came with its own set of issues though, and one last thing it did come with was a debug menu, which was obviously very quickly patched out. This debug menu was really interesting, and I messed around with it a lot. Honestly, I kinda wish they kept it in as a reward for 100%ing the game, but I also get why they removed it. Either way, I'm glad I got to mess around with it while I could. I also don't blame Insomniac for messing that up, because it should be noted that in December 2023, Insomniac suffered a major 1.6TB hack, which dealt massive damage to the company and likely to employee morale. On top of the constant bitching from the Spider-Man community, pressuring them to make changes, and when they make those changes complaining anyways, they've absolutely not had the best couple months. Following that update though, we've gotten quite a bit of smaller updates in the form of bug fixes and new suit additions, with the return of a few old suits coming back too, but there's nothing really to speak about with those. The main story thing people are waiting for now is a DLC announcement, and honestly I don't really think we're going to get it. There have been signs such as stuff relating to Beetle, as well as a layout for a Beetle storyline being found in the debug menu. I do think there is a chance we see it at the Game Awards, but if it's not there then I think we're done. And I don't mind that. It seems like Insomniac is now fully focused on Wolverine, especially after they just had most of the game leaked, and I fully believe that's a good choice to make. With a studio as talented as Insomniac, I can only pray things get better from here on out, and I hope Wolverine does really well despite all the things that occurred the last few months.
Are you finally ready to join us?
Come on, Miles! We need to hurry!
At last.
Harry! We promised to protect this city!
Yes! Come! Finish what you started! We're going to heal everyone.
This game, even a year later, I still love with all my heart. There is really nothing else I could say more about it. I get the issues that people have with it, I get that the story isn't perfect, but there's still a lot of really well written and exciting moments within it that makes it hard for me to hate. On top of that, the gameplay is goddamn excellent the entire way through. It is the most fun I've ever had with a video game, and I don't exaggerate when I say I adore it. Marvel's Spider-Man 2 is an almost perfect superhero game and a perfect Spider-Man game. If the last two games made you feel like Spider-Man, this game makes you Spider-Man. And with the added addition of the symbiote abilities, plus the ability to swap between Miles and Peter, this game truly does make you be greater together. That's about it for me though. If you didn't see my community posts, the next two videos will be pretty different from what I usually post, but one of them is very personal to me, and the other is going to be an experiment with a different type of media I want to talk about on the channel. I have to stay tuned for what those are, but they'll hopefully be out in November. But for now, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.